Hi there, I'm Will Harris from the Venice, California office of Autodesk. Thanks for joining me for this presentation about creative visual design, including some computer-generated elements here in the Flame Premium 20th Anniversary Edition. I'm going to show you some great examples of the redesigned 20th Anniversary Edition interface of the Flame, and also just some great creative examples of the interactive sort of visual designing that you can do with footage, whether it be live action footage, graphical elements, or indeed synthetically generated particles, and even integrating CG animation elements with your live action. We'll be looking at a really cool project from the guys at Time-Based Arts in London. Let me start by just playing you back a really cool master. So thanks again to the guys from Time-Based Arts. So here we are in the Flame Classic view of the Flame Premium 20th Anniversary Edition. And if you hadn't noticed already, there's been a few changes here. There's this new tabbed-based interface. We're currently looking at what we call tools, which, like I said, it's the desktop and tools, or Flame Desktop traditionally. We also have a media hub for file I/O, a conform tool for file-based conforming, completely rebuilt, and a timeline integrated with the desktop, and this is really cool. I'm going to show you more of that. We also have the batch environment now live all the time and promoted to the status similar to the desktop, where it's essentially a creative space available to you all the time. The desktop itself has had a bunch of enhancements, and it's really cool to think about all the different ways that you can browse, manipulate, and then start working with your footage. So, for example, you still have a traditional way of working with shots if you want. You can come in here and sync roll your shots if you wanted. Do this kind of mechanism if you'd like. This is just a great way of comparing things, traditional way of doing it. But you also have some other tools, like if you want to, you could just put your clips here together on a reel and view them in as essentially a source area or a set of thumbnails. This is a great way to just kind of arrange things and kind of scratch pad design things. You can also gang those clips if you want to be able to view them all together. So that's kind of neat. You could also subclip a section but based on a mark in and out here if you wanted. That works well too. So back to the reels. Let's just splice these shots together and build an edit here. This is a nice way of doing gestural editing, something that the Flame is definitely sort of famous for. The ability here to then just expand out your edit, but also work with it. We have a new way of working in storyboard view here. This is just a way where you can start dragging and dropping, replacing shots, and indeed you can even break your timeline into pieces here and start to do things like drop these three edits between those two if you like. So it's kind of a cool way of working. It is a timeline that we've built. If we double click it here, you can see how that I go to my timeline tab. That actually allows me to then start doing actual editorial stuff. I'm looking at the player here now. It's one of my several views here, and I could start trimming if I wanted to. Let's just do some ripple trimming here and actually make some adjustments. I can even do a slip and slide type function here within my edits, or if I'd want to, I might just start looking at my clips in different ways. I mentioned that there's other views here, including a triptych player. So this is a 3-up view, if you like, where I can start positioning my pointers here and even lock these guys in and start sort of scrubbing my footage in interesting ways here. So this is just a sort of a cascading player view here. Just a neat way to be able to get around your footage, get to look at things quickly and easily. So you can see this effects area here, which is where you might add a soft effects, color correction, or a time warp, those kind of things onto here. What I'm going to do here is actually add a transition. So by dropping in just a simple dissolve here, you can see how I could do that if I wanted. You can select and manipulate that. Might just turn it into a flash to white in this case. So that'd be a neat thing to do. It's just show you how you can start doing real editorial operations without really leaving the desktop at all, actually. So what I have then is my timeline integrated into my reels or desk, if you like. This allows me to do things like drop shots in directly, do a replace edit into there. I can do a insert operation or an overwrite if I'd like. I can even just drag gesturally drop a clip onto the timeline. I like to also be able to append layers here. You can drag it up to a higher layer if you want. You can even mix models here and actually go take a clip like this and use one of the traditional desktop modules here to do something like a kind of a deform process here. Maybe you just want to distort this image. This is a desktop module, a la carte if you like. That's the way of being able to do a single effect. But then you can migrate that right back into your timeline. If we reselect it here, you can see how I could drag, drop, replace, and what's happening is that it gets slugged into our timeline in a way that we can now start to see it happening. Even under our flash to white there, works quite well. So let me introduce you to our project management tool, the new workspace media panel. And this is an area where we can be in control of our batch environment, our desktop environment. We can even see reels on, off, reorder them here if we want. The desktop has definitely become virtual here. And then down here we have the media library, our clips that are inside and available to us, inside our project that is. Further than that, if I wanted to use my media hub, I can start to look to the outside world. You can see how we can browse around, see what's available on any server, and then work with any of the formats that we can import here. Specifically, I wanted to just bring in a whole folder full of sources here, so you can see how this specific folder here, which has got all these subfolders in it, can be dragged in as a unit straight into our workspace library here. So right now I'm just soft importing, if you like, or dragging these clips in, and I might want to pick and choose from it before I commit to actually ingesting this footage for best performance. It might not play great from the server. What I want to do would be to actually find the clips that I really want here. I'm just going to do a quick search and then pick those specific shots. And right now, as I said, I'm just soft importing these, but I'm going to drag just these few shots onto my desk here, and I might have decided at this point that these are the shots that I do want. So let me just select them here and actually bring that media into the system. So cache source media. Those three clips then are sent off as a background task to be ingested. So let's just take these clips and drop them into my timeline. I can insert them in or overwrite here if I want. Well, what I want to do in this case is I want to just snap them right at the end of my timeline, but using a vertical stack technique. So I can take those three and just with a modifier here, drop them in as a vertical edit at the end of my timeline. So let's take these three clips and put them into the batch effects environment. That means that we're going to, rather than using a regular soft effect, we'll do a create batch effects. That brings us into our procedural compositing area. So we can then come in here and work with just the quick comp that it's thrown together for us here. Or if we want, we can start from scratch, if you like, and just build things together. We'll eventually connect it to this node to bring it back to the timeline. But this is a great sort of creative area of the system where we can just start doing all sorts of things. So for example, we might just be looking for looks at this point. We might be searching for kind of effects, things that could happen to our footage that might or might not be what we like. I've a very kind of easy creative environment here, where we can start doing things like this. Let me just use an octave distorter here to get some interesting looking edge effects going on there. Alternately, I might start mixing blending modes here to get a much more emphasized look. So if that's what I was after, that's cool. Otherwise, I could be looking at something completely different, like, let's try a completely different look on the next guy here, while we're having that initial conversation, perhaps, as to how we want things to look. This is a kind of a painterly effect we call stylize. It allows you to have this kind of stroked look over the image. There's a bunch of presets here that allow you to try stuff out again, like, for example, this chalk look here, kind of a neat way of working where you could actually get this kind of static look, or maybe mix it up to get it just a little bit more, a little slightly different look here. Let's just see how that's, so that's by painting on each frame, you're going to see things moving on each frame. Alright, but these are all 2D effects. What if you want to do something 3D? Indeed, in Flame we're able to do some really cool stuff in 3D in our action environment. This is it right here. So if I were to just take this layer into the action environment, one of the cool things about it is that you can actually take a layer here, and as opposed to having it as a flat image, you can distort it and move it in 3D space, right? So I can grab corners and move them around. I can adjust things individually, so I could start doing this kind of thing if I wanted, warping, adjusting, and it really is able to be moved in 3D space. So this is just a really cool way of manipulating here in action. We'll key this and break it apart in 3D space. So let me just use a simple, like a Luma key here, to get a good looking key, and a very quick key here just to blast the edges here, and maybe we'll just bring in our guy here as a background and start breaking apart this element. So I'm going to use a tool called Atomize. This is really a way of taking an image and breaking it into dots of different sizes. So, and it all is based on the essentially the mesh resolution of your image. You can set how big the grid is if you like, and then set how big each individual point is on that grid. So if we go for a look a bit like this, you can really start to understand that these points are all being just held there in space on my layer. And then of course I might then want to start displacing them or projecting them out into space. A great way to do that is just using a texture. So we'll come back out here to our batch environment and bring in one more element. We'll grab a substance generator. This is another procedural generator that allows us to build textures right off the bat. So I'm actually going to just do some flowing dots here, some grids. This is a 2D image, but it's really just a way to start building up texture for movement. And you'll see how I'm going to use this right now. I'm going to feed it in, and we'll just use it not as an image layer, but as a displacement map. So we'll take our layer and bring in this image as displacement. So you're going to start to see what happens when I start moving the pixels around like this. It's just one little cube at this point, so let me just tile it out so it affects everywhere. And you're going to start to get the idea as to how you can have complete control over how these pieces move. And of course, as the footage plays, it's going to move around based on the different position of those dots. Next thing to do might be to just bring in a fresh copy of this. Let me just blend it back. We can certainly play with different ways that these layers will interact with each other, and you can see how bringing back the original is going to give us an interesting look. We might even use a masking tool to determine how the different layers will be revealed. So let's use the G mask. Right here in our action environment, we're able to just essentially cut a hole in space, affecting one or all layers. This is just like a black hole through to the background. But if I want to, I can then tell it, hey, just affect this one layer, and you can see how that then allows us to start interacting these layers via this shape here. So I can start to build a soft blend between my layers if I like, or start just making these different pieces interact. And we've still got complete control over the size of these dots. In this case, we could have different choices there, or we could play with that image-based resolution, as I was saying, to get that nice kind of broken up kind of look for a real quick and easy way of just atomizing our image here. So here's one with all three of them atomized. You can just see how you could spend a little more time, blend these layers together. We're actually using a bit of lighting and lighting effects. So let's now leave our BFX, go back up to that master timeline, and you'll see our comp is now sitting in the scene. So if I park at any frame, it's going to build that frame for me, but I'm still inherently in the timeline here that we started with. What's really cool about this is it makes a great mechanism to then be able to do things like, take a copy of the clip, let's say. Maybe we want to just start a versioning string here. We'll call this one a V2, and we'll jump right back into it and maybe continue to work, right? So this is a neat way to be able to make changes quickly but still stay in the context of a timeline. Here's a slightly further along version where we have some textures being built still in 3D space. Actually, if we look in here, you can see what I mean. I've got myself a kind of a bunch of logos that are all emitting here. These are really moving in space, which is kind of cool. That get blended with one of those textures that we were just looking at. That forms a kind of a basis for the layer, so as that when you composite them together, you get something that looks like this. And you can just see how we can blend in our effects, sort of combining 2D and 3D techniques here to produce a cool looking effect. Let's exit back to the top level of our timeline again here. So hopefully you can really see the redesigned architecture here, where you can start with the desktop, go into the timeline, then into the batch environment and back. In another dancer's shot, you can see a really cool example of lighting and kind of keeping the 3D aspect of a composite whilst doing lighting. What we have here is our three dancers just kind of in front of a background here. But notice that they're laid out at different scales, but also if we look in perspective here, you can see how these different dancers are at different depths, kind of as they would be in the real scene here. But these different depths can be respected in the process. What I mean by that is if we look at the deliverables out of our action here, you'll see that we have some matte outs here, so you can see your different mats. Those can be useful for grading, using it in the Flame Premium grading if you like. There's also a Z depth or Z depth out, and this special pass position or world position data. These different things can be useful depending on what you want to do. So here's those mats output as individual RGB mats if we want to use them for grading. That grading process may well get you to something that looks like this. So by using those mats individually, you could do hold out isolations of different colors and so on, and that kind of cool glowing effect within grading. But that might not be enough. You might want to actually bring back your graded result, which remember is essentially just a flat image at this point. That would mean that you to do sort of final lighting and effects work, remembering the layers and the breakout that we had before, we can actually use, rather than sort of just lighting a flat surface here, we can actually use some of our passes from compositing directly in here. So for example, that position map fed now down into another action with the graded source coming in. If I just open that up, you can see that if I unhide my position map, what I'm going to start to see here, if I move my light around now, is that the different layers will get hit by light at different depths. The reason for that is that we really are now working, if we just spin around here, with depth information. So this is just a way of pushing pixels back and forth based on metadata, if you like, from the previous comp. If we look back at our schematic, you can see that this position data is being passed from the raw, the raw action to a new one here with the graded material. So this is just a cool technique that lets us do stuff like lighting on graded material. This could have come from absolutely anywhere at this point. And indeed, if I just show you just how much you could do here, being able to do things like take lighting effects, lens flares, and so on, and be able to take them in and through and behind your different characters here, all based on the depth that is now sort of extra meaningful metadata in the source here. So that's just a really cool technique. Wanted to share with you guys. So coming back to our master here, you might remember the ending here. We have a pack shot with a bunch of 2D graphics and then there's some 3D CG work in the foreground. An interesting thing about this shot was some of the choices that had to be made to do with what would be done with CG content, both FBX models as well as EXR renders, and then the 2D content, the sort of background build of the graphic elements in the background. It's really a combination of techniques here. We'll look in the batch environment here and start with just that background build. What we're doing here is using 3D paths, which are really just sort of paths in space to host these elements. It's kind of something that's really cool about this from a design point of view is that you always want to see these elements facing you as the camera, and that's done by actually using a technique we call look at, where they all have a relationship back to the camera here. So wherever the camera points, all of these graphic elements will face. It's a really neat way of working, keeping everything facing towards you all the time. Alright, then the watches itself, the foreground elements there, were experimented with in a couple of ways. This is an FPX model of the watch, and what you'll be able to see is that if I actually take a look here at just the wireframe, you can see how it was built, how it works. It's a proper polygonal mesh, and we can work with it in interesting ways. We can set a high quality hardware anti-aliased view here. I can then start to map it up here. You'll be able to see how the different sections of the watch come together. So we've just got a basic geometry here, and we'll just go grab some more elements. We'll use our workspace media browser again here to bring in something like just a screen here. Let's just connect that up. You'll be able to see how that could work. So we'll just map specifically the face of the watch here, so you can see that working. If we just spread him out a little bit here, that will never cover anything but the face, which is neat. And even as we move around and start working with the watch, you'll be able to see that holds. You could surface it with other textures if you like, or start working on reflections. So let's use a IBL or image-based light to actually cast reflections on the shiny surface of this watch. Whilst I don't have one sitting in my project, actually, what I'll do is I'll jump over to the Media Hub here and just go to a location here where I do, out on the file system, and let's just pick one of these. I'm just going to drag it and drop it straight into the batch area, which is a real nice way to be able to just bring in your footage. Let's just see what that gets us. It just gets us this clip right here. We'll go ahead and connect him in also. Now, I don't want this as a freestanding image. What I really want here is something more like this. I want to be able to use it as an IBL, so it will pull out another type of map here, IBL map, and then whatever we connect it below here, it'll start affecting. And what you'll see is, if I use these guys for example, and this, all three of them, exactly what an IBL does is it literally creates environmental lighting. We can look at it as a background if we'd like. So this is now a sort of a background environment. It's not mapped correctly yet. Let's go ahead and cylindrical map this, and you'll start to see how this process works, where I'm using this environment as a way of casting reflection or indirect lighting onto this this watch model here. Now, of course, I might want to work with it a little more gently here, perhaps soften it out a little bit for the effect I'm after, and then let's just go ahead and build something that's going to really work nicely for us for this kind of a look. Let's bring our background into play here and start getting an idea of what we might want to be doing with this. So you can see the graphics building behind us here, and let's just take a moment here to set our lights the way we want, but also we could use a technique here to instance out this geometry. I've got a bunch of nodes over here that can be used as a little instancing arrangement. This is really just a way to cascade an effect here. So what I want to do is actually span out my watches so you can start to see how that might work for us, and see how we could sort of wrap them around here. And then just by taking a basic loop here, we'll use our control loop here, what we could then start to do is to rotate it around. Kind of an interesting way as to how those graphics were kind of intended that we just saw earlier. So that might just be a really cool way of laying that out on top of our graphics. And then maybe just to sort of give you an idea how far you can go still working with 3D geometry here, I want to just add some refined lighting. Well, actually, we've got a light in the scene, but let's add some blooming to it. So this is a technique where we can then start to create 3D glow, maybe even just a nice sort of softened out diffuse glow if we wanted, or a tighter one if we want. And then even more on top of that if we wanted, let's just go easy on our bloom for now, as I wanted to add in a streaking effect as well. So this is really just a lighting property on the scene. We'll just go looking in some of our relighting tools here, and one of them is a streak texture. So this is just a great way to be able to then take the overall effect. Let's just sort of back it off here, make it a little more subtle. This actually gives us an actual streak effect. We'll sort of rotate it around to get the look we're after. Maybe we'll even go for a sort of a diagonal look and just go nuts with it a little bit. See how we could even bring in that twice but offset it the other way. So you can just sort of really see how we could get to a funky place if we want in terms of lighting, even the 3D models like this, FBX models in this case. If you were to go towards a EXR type strategy, working together with an animation artist, you might have something like this. So we have our EXR, which is a multi-channel EXR. This is our blue watch. You can see there's other passes, a lighting pass, and of course matte isolation elements, as well as some reflection passes as well. So I'm comping some of the basics here, some lighting, a little bit of maybe just extra gain on our lighting here, give us some slightly more dramatic lighting, and then some reflections here, which will also kind of pump up a little bit as well. So you can just see that working with a high quality rendered image is always going to give you a finer, sort of clean result than working with models, which is one reason to do this. You also get this flexibility here to start compositing the passes together. We bring that in together into our action scene here, and you can just see how this is just a way of being able to take the flat plate, comp it in on top of maybe some others here, so you can start to see how that shot would really come together. Of course, making changes is easy, whether you want to replace this EXR clip here, or maybe in this case you just want to make a change within your compositing, like a sort of a lighting adjustment or a change in the way that the actual colors work here, just by changing the grading on our lighting there if we wanted. That would give us a result like that. So let's take a look at one more shot. Back in our timeline here, there's a shot where our DJ starts up the dance floor And really what's happening here, if you think about it, is it's a tracking shot, moving camera, that reveals the room, and indeed comping in all the different layers of people there, of course green screen, keying the foreground as well. So just starting with the backplate, you can imagine how we need to mat out any moving pieces that aren't sort of locked down furniture to be able to produce a good camera track here. So we've got a isolation for the hands that we're going to use in compositing, but we also have just a cutout here of what is the screen, just roughly cut out so as that we can't track there either. And if we look at our analyzer, our 3D camera tracking tool, you see I'm set up to track outside both of those, and we'll just hit it. This is a process that does a 2D track of as many points as it wants. In this case I'm asking for 250 trackers, so that just takes a minute, and then produces a 3D point cloud and a moving camera. And here's a bunch of points generated. So the first thing to do is probably to just remove any remaining kind of rogue points down here. So I'm just going to delete those out and resolve the points, the 3D part of this track. Then let's do a filter based on poor quality tracks. So we want to pick up all those sort of bad trackers, and I think I'll just add this one and this one, delete those, solve one more time, and we should start to get down into a lower refinement number here that's telling me I've got a more stable track going. So any kind of still bad stuff that I want to get rid of here, I can still do, and you'll start to see how things, are getting a lot better now. And you can see how we might still have a couple of things to deal with. Let's just take a look in the perspective view. Here's my kind of DJ board here, looking good, and you can get the idea there's some stuff happening in the background. These points that are solved in the foreground have got no business being there, so we'll get rid of those and just refine this down to really get a nice clean result. So there's the camera moving up past the points, and just a really interesting way of getting an idea as to what we've got here ready to work with for a 3D tracked result. Back here I'm actually going to just pick a couple of points to use as markers. There's a couple of points in the background here that may not be that real, but will work for us for now. We'll just grab a point in the back and generate an axis. That's really just building me a locator in the back of the scene that will move up and down, kind of like the back wall if you like. So let's just take a different version of the shot here. This one has been keyed, ready to start introducing a background, and you'll be able to see how this guy probably makes sense to remove at this point, the mask that is. And let's just start throwing in a couple of images here. So we're ready to build a simple background. I've got some location stills here to play with that we could just take a quick look at. You can see that these are some of the stills from on set. This one actually will work nicely for us. I'll just take that and drop it straight into my comp here. So it's dropping it straight into the environment here, and then just by connecting it in, it gives us a nice move. Now this is not going to sort of cut it. It's really just a flat still in our scene. We might be able to cheat it a little bit with some stretching, bending perhaps, to really kind of get an interesting look going on here. But it's certainly not going to sort of relive itself as a complete reprojection of the room. And that's where the really big power tools come out for things like camera projection, geometry building from scratch here in the Flame. So we'd start by building some geometry aligned to the background, and the way we do that is just by using a tool called Perspective Grid. This is just a cube of geometry here that we're going to use to start framing out the building, and I'll bring into my scene a perspective grid. This is a tool that lets us pick the four corners of a rectangle in space to align objects. In this case we want to align to this wall, and it doesn't really matter even if you can't see all the points that you're working with, but if you can guess where they are in space, as I'm doing here, you can then start to judge exactly how things would come together. So by just carefully picking those points, we would then align our cube to this. So let's just come in here and hang these guys off each other. So you can see how that will just snap right in, and then with a little bit of adjustment, what we're able to do then is to line it right into space by eye a little bit in terms of the actual scale of the object that we're trying to match. So we do something like this to just line up the sides. I'll actually move it and sit it in there so that my cube is now lined into space. Put that back to a solid. And you can start to see how this sort of building process begins. If I bring in another plate here, this is going to be my floor, and we'll take that and just use a perspective grid now to line out the floor. So just one more grid here, and this will let us pick the ground points here. So we'll just grab the four corners of this big rectangle on the ground. Notice how when I line this up the last time, it then actually figures out my grid, and I'm now in a position where I should be able to start laying out this large piece of geometry to just act as a kind of a ground plane in my scene. So these are the building blocks, and you can work your way to something that looks a bit more like this, where you have your whole environment built, adding cylinders in different places here. And if we just take a look from a perspective view, you can see how this is building out the whole club environment in a little bit more detail here. So you can see how this would work. You can see the camera moving through the scene, and just get an idea of how we're going to start to move towards much more control over the 3D nature of this environment. Let's now take a look here. Here's all our pieces, and I'm going to just show you how we would then start projecting. This is a special kind of projector that does camera projection, and we can pick individual pieces of the environment if we want here, or indeed the entire environment could be reprojected. So if we then take another look at our kind of working view here, you can see how this works. It literally reprojects from the point of view of the camera this whole scene, and then the geometry is as detailed as you want to make it for what you need. So once you have that, you're now in a position where you can start to see the scene moving around, reprojected, but you also have complete power over lighting now. So the kind of thing that you could do, let's just take this guy and show you how you can then start moving the lights around in any direction here, and you're able to just sort of change the way the environment looks quite dramatically, actually. One really cool thing to do would be to introduce a shadow caster on this light. So just with a little soft shadowing here, I'm going to set my light to sit over in the side, and you can just get an idea as to how you might get some quite dramatic kind of lighting effects going this way. Setting up some soft shadowing, or indeed if you wanted like semi-shadow, you could do that too. Just a really neat way to be able to just relight your environment using the geometry. So that could be a base kind of lighting for our room, and then we're going to need some more sort of disco type lights in here as well. So we'll take this and just show you how now you've got the ability to start moving lights back and forth in the environment, as well as to actually start adding and contributing light to things. So if I just want to just bring this back around down here, for example, you could see how this could work, giving us some sort of fill lighting here in our scene. So that's great. We also have some dancers here that we could bring into play. So we just show you how by putting these different video layers into the environment, that gives us a way to be able to lay these guys out in space. They're in rows right now. We're using a little instancing mechanism here where we can send them back and forth in space to sort of randomize that spacing a little bit more if we wanted. And then as we start to look at our sort of lighting solution on these guys, we could nuance this to suit exactly who we're looking at. So let's just see if we can get something that looks pretty cool here. So we come in here and just sort of throw some light into the scene. maybe crank it even a bit more here, and you can start to get the idea that this is going to give us a pretty cool looking setup here. One last thing to do might be to drop some actual light rays onto our lights here. We'll just dial this in a little bit for some general lighting here. We need to blend these lights back a little bit at this point. Maybe we'll just set something that looks more like this with a nice high quality set of rays. And indeed we could use these rays on other lights as well if we wanted, depending on how exactly we want this to look. So hopefully this really gives you an idea of just the power of the flame system and what makes it so important for this kind of work, where you need to be able to completely reconstruct things in space. It's just a really cool way of getting control over a 3D environment, even if you don't have a big 3D department to work with as well. Alright, coming back to our desktop, let me just play you back this really cool piece from the guys at Time-Based Arts in London one more time. So some really great work with a really super fine polish to it. Thanks again to those guys from Time-Based Arts. So I hope you enjoyed this kind of deep dive into the pure creative visual design side of the flame that this job really exemplifies. I've really enjoyed showing you this stuff, and please check out the area for more tutorials, content, blogs, and a lot of information on our products. Thanks for listening.